Hey y'all, so before I get started, I just wanted to let you guys know this particular video will deal with some fairly heavy subject material. Viewer discretion is advised. We all get into situations that can be overwhelming and or negative, both short-term and long-term. How we handle those situations usually, and there's a heavy emphasis on the word usually, goes into one of three different categories. One, we internalize it, something I'm very guilty of doing and that I've been working on for quite some time. Two, we take that negative instance or ongoing instance and we integrate it or transfer it through activities, through creative use, through some sort of proactive means to increase self-awareness and for long-term sustainability, whether we dispose of said negativity in some form or fashion or whether we continue to work with it. The third is where we take said negative thing and we dispose of it by transferring it onto something or somebody else. And that is the topic of today's interlude, namely transference. Now, for a while, I've been using the word transference as kind of in happenstance, in passing, not really knowing that it was an actual psychological term until I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is a licensed counselor, and she confirmed that transference is an actual psychological terminology and an actual phenomenon that seems to be primarily Freudian-based, but could also have some Carl Jung basage behind it. I don't have any background in psychology or psychotherapy, so what I'm saying is strictly stream of consciousness. However, what transference is, like I said, it's a phenomenon and a psychological condition where you take something that has been long-term ingrained in you and impacting you, and you dispose of it by transferring it onto somebody else. Now, I will actually put a link in the description below to Psychology Today where I found the article and all the concepts behind transference and also countertransference so you guys can see it. And if I find any other resources, I will post it in the link as links in the description below as well. Now, I'm saying transference is focused on somebody else, but that is not to discount that you can transfer it onto something else. In fact, we do see transference onto other negative activities and or refreshments, as a friend of mine likes to use. But the focus of this video is transference from person to person to person. Now, I'm also going to focus on transference from the giving end as well as the receiving end. Because I feel both of these need to be kind of lumped together so y'all, if anybody has been in a situation as a giver or receiver, maybe this is going to be some kind of way to establish a conversation with somebody or maybe even with yourself to kind of at least give an air of tangibility. And I use this frequently in my interludes, tangibility. And before I go any further, I want to just explain why. Because I come from the concept that if something's hanging out there, somewhere in the offing or somewhere just beyond the veil of understanding, if we discover what it is and we make it tangible, it becomes more apparent and therefore potentially easy to dispose of and or integrate in a proactive fashion. And I take that from Ursula Le Guin, an author of different stories such as the Earthsea Saga and the ones that walked away from Omelas and a few others. And how I kind of took that from consideration is in Earthsea, characters are given a birth name and a true name, and in that true name, that's where the power resides. And there is that ongoing story that if we understand somebody's true name, we have power over it. And I kind of feel like that's an ongoing allegory for the human psyche and the human equation as a whole. If we can understand something to the point it becomes tangible, we then therefore have a little bit more power over it. So with that being said, why am I talking about transference? I've had a lot of time to reflect on the concept of this, and while I may at some point have engaged in transference on a giving end, honestly, I don't know, I don't recall, but for a very long period of time, I feel like I have been on the receiving end of transference in a more and more negative fashion. I'm not saying this of anything that's happened recently, but rather an ongoing trend going back to as far as I can remember. And I'm going to touch upon that a little bit more. But I feel like regarding the concept of transference from either end, primarily on the giving end, which is actually be the first focus on it before I focus on the receiving end, that the majority of people that engage in that on a giving end aren't even aware that they're doing it. And the reason I say that is because the human psyche, from the nerve center, and I've talked about this in previous interludes, the nerve center of the brain is divided into three points, among others. The primary three I'm going to focus on that you're going to hear throughout the course of this: ventral vagal mode, which is when you're centered, you're free to be yourself, you're at your most peace, you're grounded, that kind of thing. The second mode is called sympathetic vagal, and that is when the fight or flight mode is triggered in. And the third core center is known as the dorsal vagal, the art of playing dead to escape from a situation. So now that you have these three psychological nerve centers kind of put out there on the table, I feel like when we are placed in a negative situation, sympathetic mode is triggered first and foremost. It's a natural reaction to respond to negativity and or danger. We either fight it off or we run from it. And I feel like transference is a combination of both fighting and flying from it. We don't want to deal with this, so we're pushing it off as long as we possibly can without trying to handle it. And therefore, when something or somebody of importance comes into our lives, whether it's a colleague, family, friend, significant other, anything of that nature, we take that and we imprint it onto them as kind of once again, a reaction to something that may be bothering us. This could be something that's recently happened. It could be something that's been long-term. I don't know. I feel like transference is just a natural occurrence to take what we are handed and push it away from us so it escapes from our systems. Kind of like getting a poison out of your system. And I'm not talking about just something like, oh, I had a bad day, I'm pissed off, or this situation really bothered me, or I feel overwhelmed. I'm talking about continuous transference, because we all have bad days, we all have rough nights, we all have things that bog us down, and I'm not trying to discount that. Nor am I trying to discount people that are in continuous negative situations that they are consciously or unconsciously causing transference. I am in no way, shape, form, or fashion discounting that or downplaying psychological issues that are causing that. What I am doing is trying to bring to the table and make awareness for what this is actually happening. Because as I've said, I don't think people are aware of what they are doing when they throw that onto somebody else. And for some of us on the receiving end, we as internalizers, or at least for me as an internalizer, I really get to the sit point when I'm overwhelmed by it. I don't know how to process it. I just take it. And for those of us that hail from my school of charm that are slow to process and slow to parse things out and parse them together and kind of untie the knots, if we get thrust into a situation over and over and over and over and over again, we essentially, as receivers, kind of become an emotional dumping ground. And neither of which is healthy from those of us that are unconscious or, God forbid, conscious givers to those of us that are receivers and aren't sure how to go through the motion. Now, there's a myriad of reasons that we do engage in transference, and once again, links will be in the description below. A big piece of this will be in the Psychology Today article, which will be at the top of this description. Once again, if you want to do additional research and you find some other stuff, please leave those links in the comments below. I'd love to know your findings. So now that we've kind of established the parameters of the giving and the receiving end, I want to talk about the damage that goes into that. And it's damaging for both parties, because if we are unconsciously transferring negativity, ongoing psychological or physical or mental or any other type of negativities onto somebody else, it's damaging for the givers because we, using the term we loosely, the givers are not proactively finding a way to handle said long-term negativity. We are not finding ways to handle it. We're not trying to find ways that are going to be proactive. All the givers are doing is pushing that out of themselves onto a different receiving end. And if it's completely unconscious and the said givers are not being made aware of the situation, whether by the receiver or through other means, or even by suddenly kind of becoming aware of the situation, it's never to get handled. And that's damaging because it's going to cause degradation in long-term anything from work to family to relationships to your surroundings to just how you're going to react in short-term and long-term things to even how you view things, because you're seeing this through a narrow scope. And there's only so much that the giver can take before realizing that this is going nowhere, and it just becomes the dam breaks, and it completely, at least from my understanding and from my research, completely causes an implosion on the giver. And the same thing can be said about the receiver. And just kind of put this out there, I'm not saying this for attention or woe is me or for martyrdom or anything like that. That is strictly so y'all get a chance to understand me as a person. As somebody who is an internalizer and for several years had been kind of coined the phrase the sin eater approach, we become hotbeds for transference. Because we suck it up, we take it in, we absorb it, we do some kind of method, which could also be used as kind of a sympathetic or even an empathetic approach. Once again, I'm not well versed in such subjects. If you do find a little bit more research, once again, I'd love to hear from y'all. But as receivers, we become dumping grounds because we are either, how do I phrase this? We're either unsure of how we can voice our concerns, we're either not sure how to broach said subject, we are not well versed in the subject matter, so we just take it, we take it, we take it more, we take it more. Until then, it completely engulfs us, and we are unable to dispose of the giver's transference and dispose of whatever else is impacting us, whether something's bothering us, whether we're overwhelmed, and that takes a toll on the receiver as well, both on a physical, mental, and emotional method, because it just becomes completely toxic for that person because they're going to keep taking it in, and like any dam, it's going to break eventually. And I feel like, at least from my perspective, I've kind of started realizing a little bit more where that dam is and just where the breaking points are, as well as discovering the limits for myself as a receiver. Now, once again, I may have been a giver at some point. I don't recall. I'd like to think I'm not, just because I consider myself a pretty much of a humanist and trying to find good in all situations. But there becomes an eventual point where no more can be done on the receiver. We hit that wall, we hit that dam, and we have to stop. And as well as, once again, it taking its toll on us. And as for givers, if they're unconscious about it, the receiver has to tell the giver at some point, this is what you're doing. It has to stop. You have to bring conscious awareness to the situation on both ends. And sometimes the giver does suddenly become aware that what they're doing is wrong and what they're doing is negative. And they start taking steps to try and rectify it, or at least begin conscious cognizance and awareness to it. However, and this is going to be where that's going to take some energy out of me. If you are aware of continuous transference and you do nothing to stop it, that's when it turns into a form of emotional, rhymes with excuse. And once again, I am not discounting or downplaying if somebody's been through a continuous negative format or a continuous series of negative events. I am not doing that, because those things run deep and those things have to be brought to light as well. However, if all you're doing is transferring that pain onto another individual or another situation, you are not healing, you are not growing, and in some extreme cases, you are no better than what has been done to you. And transference could be considered a form of emotional, rhymes with excuse. Once again, I don't know all the moving pieces to the puzzle, and those pieces are constantly changing, nor am I, once again, trying to say, put myself on a pedestal or as a martyr, nor am I saying givers are completely and utter garbage. I am saying that there needs to be awareness to the situation on both parties in both parts so that some form of catharsis can be reached on both people. Nobody deserves to undergo negativity continuously, nor does anybody deserve to be on the receiving end of said negativity, and in turn, by transitive means, nobody deserves to be a giver of said negativity to parse onto somebody else. There's an old logical equation. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. And in most logical cases, that can be true. Other cases, it cannot be true. But through an illogical means, sometimes if A equals B, but B does not equal C, somehow it gets bypassed. Now, there is a logical equation on that, but I don't remember this because I haven't done a logic course since college, and that has been, oh God, it's been like a long time ago, 15 years ago. But that's not the point of this. The point is that somehow our brains trigger that to bypass the middle part of that equation, think that A equals C, so therefore we have the opportunity to transfer said A into C. Confused yet? I probably am being confusing as well. But once again, the point is transference is thoroughly negative. It's a harsh cycle, and it has to be broken out of like any other part of the human psyche that is of the negative or downfall. Because if it doesn't get rectified on the giving end, it's going to continue and eventually poison the well. And if it's continuous on the receiving end, the receiver can either continue the cycle and take the transference from person A to a different individual, or they can react and it causes an even bigger cycle. It's a very gray area, but the point of this interlude is to bring awareness. If you feel like you are at the receiving end, you have to tell the giver. If you feel like you are consciously, God forbid, or unconsciously doing that, you have to have a hard look. And nobody wants to have that hard look. It is very difficult because it means you have to come to grips with the fact that you are doing something negative. And it also means having to take a reflection and realize what is causing that. And a lot of people don't want to do that, and I don't blame them. I really don't. I feel like it's just a subject that is often ignored, overlooked, intellectualized, or, once again, transferred. So, in conclusion, resources, once again, will be listed down below in the description. But if you feel like any of this is happening, don't stay silent. Say it out. Tell the person you feel like this is having a negative impact on you. Point out some warning signs. Point out some thoughts. If you have any resources, share it with the person. And if you're on the giving end of it and you're becoming aware that this is a negative trend, curb it. I'm not saying put the brakes on immediately, pull out the emergency brake and stop, because that could probably be almost as dangerous as continuing it, but bring the game to a close. Bring it to the credits. Have the climax and then the falling action. It's the only way to heal. It's the only way to grow. And it's the only way to integrate. I'm not saying to sweep the negativity under the rug or just throw it out a window and defenestrate it, but I'm saying find a way to integrate it. Bring self-awareness. Bring cognizance and make it a part of yourself so you don't forget, but you also don't lose it and you don't get rid of it. It's a part of who you are. It's a part of who you will be, just like I will always be an internalizer, and I'll always be sympathetic and in a lot of cases empathetic. That's just who I am. But in conclusion, you got to take that first step, y'all, as a giver or a receiver. It's the only way to make amends and to forge ahead and to integrate. So maybe what I said makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's us we have to live with. People can only suggest, people can only offer, people can only push, people can only press, but it's how we handle everything. At the end of the day, it falls upon us as individuals. So take that time to think, take that time to reflect. And most importantly, be kind to yourself. Be good to yourself. Because that positivity will spread around you and impact others, the same thing that negativity will impact and spread around those near you. So always be aware, y'all. And hopefully what I've said over the course of this 19 minutes, 20 minutes makes a lot of sense. If not, feel free to click away. But until then, always be good to yourselves, and always remember, keep your fires burning.